So we can begin this sixth and last session of this module on the wisdom of emptiness, as we ordinarily do, with a brief meditation session. So we already are familiar with how to place both our body and our mind into a conducive position, a conducive attitude. And it is good to remember that by taking 3 deep cleansing breaths in the beginning, we can free ourselves from a great deal of the distractions and tensions that may be with us from the events of the day. And then, having calmed and concentrated our mind through such techniques as mindfulness of the breath, we can then cultivate as expansive and as altruistic a compassionate motivation as we can for this session, reminding ourselves that we're not alone, but are in fact members of a large, extensive family, every single member of which wishes only to be happy and to be free from suffering. Now there is a brief practice I would like to introduce this evening at this point. And in order to begin it, we should feel that we're seated in the presence of the author or the founder of the teachings that we've been studying, not only during this module, but all of the previous modules in the Discovering Buddhism series. So this, of course, is Shakyamuni Buddha, the enlightened being who appeared on this earth 2,500 years ago and turned the wheel of the Dharma for this age. Now, if we have the ability to visualize Shakyamuni before us, we can do that. For example, we can visualize that in space in front of us is a large, extensive throne upon which an open lotus appears, and on top of that cushions of the sun and the moon, and then on top of that the teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha himself, wearing the robes of a monk, sitting in a cross-legged position, left hand in his lap, holding a begging bowl, his right hand in the earth-touching posture, and his whole being glowing with a golden radiance, every aspect of which symbolizes his unlimited compassion, unlimited wisdom, and unlimited skill. So if we have the ability, we can call to mind the visualization of such a being of light. And for that, we could use, for example, one of the statues in the front of the room as a model, and then having glanced at such a statue, we can then bring it to mind and visualize not a statue, but a living, breathing light being, completely radiant. But for many of us, we're not familiar with such a visualization practice, and in that case, it is quite sufficient to simply feel that we are seated in the presence of this golden radiance. We don't have to worry about the form it takes. We could simply feel that it is radiant like the sun, or like a great golden, transparent sphere of light. But the important thing here is not the details of what we visualize. The important thing here is the attitude that we have to this enlightened being. An attitude of respect, an attitude of gratitude. And one way of establishing this proper attitude is just by reflecting on whatever benefit we may have received from having studied his teachings. From having heard them explained, having read them, having thought about them, having meditated upon them, if, as the result, we feel that we've experienced any level of benefit, from the smallest to the greatest, we simply recognize that the reason that we experience that benefit, the source of that benefit, is Buddha himself. And if we reflect on that connection, then an attitude of respect, an attitude of appreciation and gratitude will naturally arise in our minds. So the first expression of this respect and gratitude is to pay homage, or, in other words, to offer prostration. The verse that accompanies this goes, "With body, speech, and mind, I pay homage with devotion." And as we recite or think of those words of homage, we can visualize ourselves multiplying until all of space is filled with beings who together offer physical, verbal, and mental prostration to the Buddha. Prostration here is not a sign of subjugation, but simply a sign of respect and devotion. If we are more comfortable, we can visualize simply placing our hands together in an attitude of appreciation, and this will serve as a physical prostration. The verbal prostration is any verses we might recite, such as the verse I just recited before, with body, speech, and mind, I pay homage with devotion. And the mental prostration is simply the attitude of respect itself. And as we adopt this attitude of respect and gratitude, we can feel that rays of purifying light come from the Buddha or the golden sphere visualized in front of us and completely cleanse us of any defilements we may have accumulated by any thoughtless or negative act we may have created in relation to the objects of refuge. So feel that these purifying rays of light coming from the Buddha or the golden sphere in front of us completely permeate our being, as if we were bathing in this golden light, completely cleansing us of all defilements, all negativities, especially those we may have created out of showing disrespect to the founder of the teachings. Then the next phase of practice is that of presenting offerings. The verse that accompanies it goes, I make offerings, both the actual and the mentally transformed. Well, in this room, there are actual offerings that have been placed on the altars. We can imagine all of space being filled with the multiplication of these and of glorious offerings of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations. Everything and anything that we find beautiful within this universe, we feel with a mind that is completely free from any sense of miserliness, we offer up and present to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. Feel that the Buddhas accept these offerings without the slightest attachment to them, but are greatly pleased. Next comes the declaration or the confession of non-virtue. I declare all my beginningless negative actions. Anything that you remember, and even those things that you can't remember, that were of a non-virtuous, destructive nature, either towards other beings or to the sources of the teachings. Anything that was the occasion for the experiencing of harm. by any being whatsoever, instead of trying to hide it, we openly declare it. With the determination to avoid as much as possible creating similar experiences of harm in the future. We should do this with an attitude completely free of guilt, which ties us to the past, but instead with a simple mind of regret, making the determination to avoid such non-virtue as much as we can in the future. Declaring or exposing our non-virtue in this way is the first and extremely important step in healing ourselves. Then we cultivate the mind of rejoicing. We rejoice in the virtue all beings perform. So now we bring to mind whatever positive, virtuous, helpful, beneficial actions performed either by ourselves or by any other being, whether ordinary or enlightened. And we rejoice in them, recognizing that they are the source of happiness and goodness. So any act of generosity that we've engaged in, any positive behavior that we've seen in ourselves or others, without any sense of arrogance or false pride, but by a simple recognition that these actions themselves are the source of goodness and benefit, we rejoice. We take pleasure. Pleasure in the knowledge that this is something that either we have done or that we have recognized others have done. Then we make the request for our teachers, the gurus, the Buddhas, to have long, fruitful lifetimes. O Buddhas, please stay here until samsara ends. So from the depths of our heart, with a mind of yearning, we ask for the gurus, the Buddhas, to remain with us, to be a guide, not only to ourselves, but to all beings, until suffering has been transcended completely. And not only to stay, but to reveal the teachings that lead to liberation and enlightenment. And thus, the verse, please turn the wheel of Dharma for the benefit of all. Then finally, in conclusion, we make a prayer of dedication. We dedicate the merit of myself and of all others that we may attain the enlightened being state. So by the virtue of all of these practices, may we achieve as fruition a state of full enlightenment, the fulfillment of our own Buddha nature, so that we can repay the infinite kindness we've received from each and every sentient being. So now, I will repeat those brief verses once again and try to cultivate the thoughts and attitudes of respect appropriate to each one. Reminding ourselves that we're seated in the presence of the Buddha, either visualized in great detail or simply as a radiant sphere of golden light. And that as we recite these verses and think of their meaning, we're bathing in this purifying radiance. With body, speech, and mind, I pay homage with devotion and make offerings, both the actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my beginningless negative actions and rejoice in the virtue all beings perform. O Gurus, please stay here until samsara ends and turn the wheel of Dharma for the benefit of all. Thus I dedicate the merit of myself and of all others that we may attain the enlightened being state. Now feel that the Buddha, in whose presence we are seated, dissolves into the sphere of golden light, which becomes smaller and more concentrated, glowing intensely. And this contracted, intense sphere of golden light comes above us over the crown of our head. And as it slowly dissolves into us, descending through our crown, and then coming to rest eventually in the very center of our heart chakra, feel that our entire being is permeated by the blessings and the inspiration of all enlightened beings. All ordinary and limited conceptions of ourself dissolve in this experience of inspiration and blessing. And we experience a taste of pure consciousness. Beyond limits. Unbounded. As extensive as space itself. then we can bring this meditation to a close. Does everyone here have a copy of tonight's handout? You don't? If you raise your hands high, then Venerable Tsoma La will pass it out. I think most people have, but a few people may not have received it. So it begins with letter K. So in this course so far, there, in addition to the general handouts that were given at the beginning of the course, there have been these additional handouts, which I think there should be 6 sides. So maybe 3 double-sided sheets, I think, at this point you should have. If you're missing any of the past ones, then during the break or at the end of the course, let us know, and we'll make sure that you get what you're missing, if we have it. If we don't have it, it might take a little while. We'll just duplicate them. Okay? We have them somewhere. Now, this evening, I made a promise to myself, which I hope I don't break, that I'm going to turn over as much of this time together to questions and discussion. But I want to reiterate why I have not entertained as many questions in this module as I have in the past ones. This is a topic I brought up before, but it's really worth repeating, I believe. The teachings on emptiness, as you'll see from even just looking at a few of the recommended readings, sample readings that I've indicated under letters L and M, for example, these teachings can be extremely extensive and detailed. Some of the books on this list are hundreds of pages long, without repeating. Well, not like me, they don't repeat themselves. Okay? So, and it's one of those situations, I believe, where we can really miss the forest for the trees. In other words, we can get so caught up in the names of the different wisdom traditions and the divisions, in the detailed definitions of this and that, that we lose sight of what these teachings are really on about. So we end up with a lot of knowledge about this and that, but nowhere closer to an understanding or an appreciation of emptiness itself, of what it's trying to point to. So during this course, I've tried as much as I can to approach these teachings from as practical a point of view as I can, really concentrating on allowing us to identify as much as we can what it is that's holding us back. What it is in our attitude that creates a block or a filter between us and the way things actually exist. What what kind of conception, what kind of idea, what kind of notion arises in our minds that interferes with our happiness, that causes us to be imprisoned, to be less than what we could be, to fail in the fulfillment of our highest potential. So, many questions can arise in relationship to the emptiness teachings, but my feeling is that until we have a taste of this basic experience of identifying, at least to some extent, what it is, what the interference is, what is interfering with our experience of happiness and fulfillment, then all of these questions and all these words and all the discussion can really lead us astray. But if we do have some sense, some feeling for what it is that we're trying to overcome by cultivating the wisdom of emptiness, a taste of the conception that we're laboring under, the misconception, that if we have just a taste of that, then any detailed readings we do in the field of emptiness, any teachings we might receive, then they go to our heart. Then they have meaning. Then those hundreds and hundreds of pages, each paragraph has meaning for us. So without that experience, even if it's just a small taste of that experience, without that, the teachings really are just so many words. And if people ask questions, well, two problems can arise. One, from my point of view, is very likely I don't know the answer. That isn't that bad. I mean, the embarrassment, of course, could be helpful. I could then find out the I to be refuted. Right? But most likely I wouldn't do that. Most likely I would just simply get embarrassed. Okay? But it goes beyond that. Because even if there was a question which I could answer, because I've heard my teachers answer it in the past, and like a parrot I could repeat it with confidence that it was the correct answer, even if I could give a correct answer to the question, there's no assurance whatsoever that that answer would help at all. Without there being an underlying sense of what it is that the emptiness meditation is designed to overcome. Okay? So that's why I've spent the previous 5 weeks trying to approach this from as practical a point of view as I can, relying very largely on the teachings of Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe, whose approach to this is extremely practical and relevant. Okay? So, having done that, then I'll open it up for questions. But my request is to have the questions come from some kind of experience, rather than just be a question of words. Okay? Because while I may or may not be able to answer the questions of simple words, whether I answer them correctly or not is not going to help any of us very much. Okay. There are a couple of things that I wanted to mention, because since this is a course on the wisdom of emptiness, there's a few things which should be said before the course is over. But I know that if I approach that right now, then by the time I'm ready to open it up for questions, there won't be much time left. I know myself that well anyway. So why don't we do this? We'll open it for questions or discussion now, and then after the break, if there still are questions, we'll kind of entertain them to the extent that we can, and then before the session is over, I'll mention those ideas that I think should be mentioned before this course comes to an end. So, I hope I haven't scared everybody off, but I know in the past people have had questions, so yes, here's one.
Would you please say more about the quote-unquote lower schools of the emptiness philosophy? I feel like I can intellectually understand the philosophy we've been talking about, which seems to be the ultimate reality, but the lower ones seem to be something I can more feel and practice in my life. at this point.
I'm going to postpone that a little because that touches on the subject that I wanted to cover before. And in the handout, letter L gives the briefest of. It's not even really a discussion. It just simply names some of these schools. So there was a few remarks I wanted to make about that, and I also had some textual references where more can be found about it. When I come time to address that question at the end, I hope I have time, I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but hopefully there'll be a few things that we can say that'll be of some help. Okay. Any other questions I can avoid answering? Yes, please.
I'm making little bits of progress trying to understand what you've been saying, and the concrete examples that you've used have been very helpful,
Mm-hmm.
as the ones in the readings are. But I find that I can't integrate this information with my prior many years of teachings on the soul, the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on that at all, or point me to something that could?
Okay, so the question is coming from an apparent contradiction between the teachings on emptiness on one hand
Mm-hmm.
and previous teachings about the soul or spirit.
Mhm.
Is that correct? Okay. Is there any rather specific point where the contradiction arises between what you've understood and experienced about the soul and so forth and the approach being taken by the teachings on emptiness? Is there one kind of crux to that? Or is it more just a matter of semantics?
I guess it's mostly semantics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess right now I would say that what I used to call the soul is it's the seed, it's our real self that leaves us when we die and goes into rebirth, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you could write a thesis on this topic.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, you could fill a library. So I know
Mhm.
it's a ridiculous question in a way, but that's why I said maybe there's a book you would point me to. Or
as far as books to recommend, what might be helpful is The Good Heart by the Dalai Lama. Have you read that? And the reason I'm recommending that is simply because he was invited by Christian contemplatives to address them and to use as his text any of the Gospels. So it was basically a Buddhist commentary on the Gospels. So the reason I'm mentioning it is that because, of course, within the Christian Gospels, terms such as soul and spirit are very central. And the Dalai Lama is giving a Buddhist perspective on that. And so I think of all of the people who could comment on it and get beyond semantic differences to understand what level of similarity or profound meaning there is to be found there, it would be the Dalai Lama. Another person who is capable of doing that with great profundity is the Vietnamese master Thich Nhat Hanh. And he has two books that relate to that. One is Living Buddha, Living Christ, and the other I always have trouble remembering the name of. But there's another book with a similar title. Okay. But Having said that, having made those recommendations, which I think is really the best answer I could give, let me muddy the waters a little bit. The Buddha's teachings on emptiness also in some contexts are referred to the teachings on selflessness, the absence of self. And within that, there's a very important phrase from Sanskrit that is used from this in the original teachings. These teachings on emptiness or selflessness often refer to the doctrine of anatma. Anatma, that's A-N-A-T-M-A. Maybe there's an N at the end as well. Anatma or anatman. Okay? An, the prefix, is a negative. Right? And Atman is sometimes translated simply as soul, or sometimes self. So, just on the level of words, it sounds like the doctrine of anatma is denying the existence of a soul or a self. It looks that way. Okay? Absence of soul, absence of Atman, absence of self. Okay? It looks that way. But that is not really what the teachings are saying. Instead, the teachings are directed against a misconception about the nature of the person, the soul, the self, whatever we want to call it. Right? Not about the existence of some higher quality in our being, but about a misconception we have about the very nature of our being. Okay? Because in some systems, and in some even people who don't subscribe to a particular system, there is a certain kind of philosophical undercurrent that whatever it is that we are exists in a concrete, independent, self-existent manner. That there's something about us which is permanent, lasting, unchanging, independent, above and beyond this body-mind combination. Right? The Buddhist teachings refute that. They refute that kind of quality, that kind of independent, concrete, unchanging quality. Right? Not just simply on philosophical grounds. You know, it's not like simply a debate between members of this school and that school, or this religion and that religion, but because, from the Buddhist point of view, holding on to such concrete self-existence of any phenomena, and especially of our own being, our own person, is really the root cause of suffering. Okay? But what happens if we approach these teachings on simply a semantic level, it sounds as if the Buddhist teachings are denying the higher functions of our being. Right? And that the Buddhist teachings most definitely are not denying. For instance, within the Buddhist teachings they say that at the present moment, in our ordinary waking state consciousness, we're actually existing on a very superficial level. You know, our sense consciousnesses are perceiving sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations. And our mind is dealing on the level of concepts and words and expressions and so forth. And this is like the very mere surface, the grossest aspect of mind, of consciousness. That so inherent or innate to this understanding is that our mind, our awareness, or if you wish to use this kind of language, our soul, our spirit, can operate on levels much more subtle and penetrating and universal than that. Okay? So from a Buddhist point of view, Our mind is is kind of like this iceberg. We see the surface, that ordinary waking state consciousness, but beneath the surface, there is potentiality for mind, for consciousness, for awareness, or for soul or spirit, if we want to use that language, that is much, much more profound. It goes beyond the limitations of this personality or that personality. Now, when we recognize that, then the Buddhist teachings are not so different from the teachings we may have received about soul, for instance, from other traditions. Because what do those teachings, those other traditions, what do they indicate when they talk about soul? They indicate that there is something beyond our ordinary, petty ego identity. That it is, that it dwells somehow deep within us, and that it's the goal of spiritual practice to get down to that level where it's operating, to let it express itself, and in that expression to experience a oneness or a unity with all the rest of the universe of creation. I mean, that seems to be the spirit behind these teachings. And there's nothing in the Buddhist teachings that deny any of that. In fact, there's everything in the Buddhist teachings that give methods for actualizing that experience. Okay? But they are adamant, the Buddhist teachings are adamant in asserting that the only way to get to that kind of universal experience, to get below the level of petty ego, separate ego identity, is to recognize that our conception of reality, as especially the reality of the soul or the self or the I or whatever we want to call it, that our conception of that is limited, concrete, independent, mistaken. So in other words, we have to remove a false conception before we can really get beneath the surface and experience the true depth and breadth of our being. Right? So on one level, yes, it denies the existence of soul if by soul, or by Atman, if we want to use the Sanskrit term, if by soul or Atman we mean some kind of solid, concrete, independent, unchanging entity. Right? But on the other hand, it affirms everything that's meant by soul, if by soul we mean this deeper, more fulfilling aspect of our being, the aspect of our being that goes beyond our separateness and speaks more to our commonality. Okay, is that helpful?
Oh, absolutely. And I think
Okay.
if I'd been able to get it into words, I would have said something similar to that. But I wanted to hear what you would say to see if I'm thinking clearly at all.
And then I would go back to, discussing, to recommending books such as the ones by His Holiness and Thich Nhat Hanh, and not only them. I mean, there's many, many great teachers from many traditions who speak to this. One of the books that turned my consciousness around so much many, many years ago was an anthology written by Aldous Huxley called The Perennial Philosophy. And for a long time it was out of print, but apparently it's back in print again. At least I did see a copy recently. And in it, what he does is he surveys a range of what is often referred to as mystical traditions. I'll say a little bit about that word in a second. And he selects these quotations and then provides commentary about different topics, and he lists, 15 or 20 different topics that come up repeatedly in this mystical literature, and he shows their commonality. And among them are quotations from the Buddhist tradition, the Christian tradition, for instance, Master Eckhart, the Sufi traditions, and great Kabbalistic teachers, and so forth. The mystic tradition. you know, before I started studying Buddhism and so forth, mystic to me meant kind of vague and occult and mysterious, and actually it didn't even have a meaning. It had a sound effect to it. Mystic was, ooh, you know, it was like Twilight Zone. That was mystic, right? Yeah, exactly. But when you start studying any of the so-called mystic traditions, what you understand, what they're talking about ultimately is union, right? That there's an experience we have of being separate, of fragmented, somehow alienated from what really is, both what really is out there and what really is in here. You know, that our life is fragmented, alienated in that sense. And mystical means experiencing union with the reality that is within and the reality that is without, because ultimately they are the same. Okay? So, if the mystic who is having that experience of union beyond petty self, beyond limited ego identity, has plumbed the depths of the self or the soul, or whatever we want to call it, to experience what is universal, you know, what the Buddhists might call the Buddha nature, or a Hindu might call Krishna consciousness, or a Christian might call Godhead, whatever name might be applied to it, the mystic is one who's actually had that experience, who's actually experienced that union. Now, depending on the tradition from which he or she comes, and the language that he or she speaks, and the audience that he or she is addressing, then that mystic experience is going to be conveyed in different language. In some traditions, it'll be expressed in theistic language, becoming one with God, for instance. In other traditions, which are not theistic in approach, it might be explained in completely different language. And the beauty of what Huxley does is by juxtaposing these different quotations and providing them with a kind of a thread of commentary, he takes you to the place beyond semantics. That you see that the differences, if there are differences, are really only semantic. You know? And it's quite interesting because, again, this is very much part of the Buddhist tradition, but it appears again and again in the other mystic traditions as well, and that is that the ultimate reality that's revealed by this mystical union with reality is, in fact, beyond words and expressions anyway. That the mystic himself or herself recognizes the impossibility of encapsulating into language exactly what that experience was. The best he or she can do is indicate it, point to it, use language in a poetic enough fashion so it creates a hint of an experience. So it's language which is kind of going beyond itself. Okay? Now, if we can approach language in this kind of poetic fashion, in which we're taking the words not as concrete, solid, independent entities and holding on to the words, but instead of trying to find out the transcendental meaning that they're pointing to, then it really doesn't matter whether what we read is Buddhist or Sufi or Christian or Jewish or any of the other many, many traditions that could be named in which this mystic tradition is expressed. It doesn't matter because the differences are only the differences on the level of words, and the experience can't be encapsulated in words anyway. So that's not the problem. You know, what's necessary is the mystic vision being conveyed in such a way that there's some blessing or inspiration or indication of a reality beyond itself. In the Buddhist tradition, they often refer to the teachings as the finger pointing to the moon. That's a commonly repeated symbol. And what this means is if we a finger pointing to the moon directs our attention, but we shouldn't mistake the finger for the moon. The finger is just showing us where to look. If we want to experience the moon, we have to go beyond the finger and see the moon directly itself. Okay? The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Okay. So, anyway. Oh, also there's one last thing before our break. There is another image which is often used, that the teachings are often likened to a raft which will take us across a river or to the other side of the ocean. And the idea here is that once we get to the other side, we don't then take the raft and carry it on our shoulders. The raft has done its work, so we leave it behind. So in the same way, we may have a spiritual teaching or a methodology or an image or whatever it is that allows us to gain understanding. Once we've gained that understanding, we don't have to hold on to that raft as if it were an idol, to make a thing out of it. It served its purposes. I don't mean that it's suggested that we show disrespect to what got us there, but that we can even turn the Dharma into a crutch. The Dharma is meant to get us to the other side, but if we hold tightly onto, my Lama said it this way, it has to be that way, these words are sacred, it can't be expressed in any other way, then what we're doing is we're taking a teaching which is meant to have a transcendent, to help bring us to a transcendent experience, something beyond, and we're turning that into a dead weight, which we're carrying on our shoulders like a raft on the other side. The Zen tradition, in its typical kind of confrontational style, they say, if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. Zen likes doing that. Likes kind of slapping you in the face to just shake you up from the complacency of turning the teachings or any aspect of the teachings into a dead weight idol that you're carrying around out of habit. Okay?
Isn't that a dangerous statement, though?
Yeah, it could be.
I've heard that statement so many times
Mm-hmm.
in my, pre-Buddhist life.
Mm-hmm.
And like among classmates or circles of people,
Mm-hmm.
I hear people taking that as if like when someone wants to talk about, oh, there's this person, he has great realizations, he's a great master, all this stuff. When people start talking in honor of great individuals, someone always comes up and says, yeah, well, if you see the Buddha on the road, you should kill him. They frequently, I hear people saying that as if that, like, don't honor anyone. Like, I'm just wondering, like, I don't know what the Zen perspective is on, like, why they think that's not too dangerous to say that. Or is it more explained if you read the book? I don't know.
Exactly.
Like, I haven't looked into that.
Yeah. Well, from the little I know about the Zen tradition, it comes out of training. The people who are saying it and the people that they're saying it to are not people who just went to a cocktail party who overheard someone praising a teacher. They're people who have undergone years and years of training in the Buddhist teachings or in methodology, and then has reached a point where this kind of statement is like the slap in the face that's necessary to get them to the next level. This is what I imagine, this is what I understand. But sure, you can take anything. The Christians say that, the devil can quote scripture, right? That's popular in the, the devil can open up the Bible and take out quotations which can be used for the most devilish purposes. And the devil has not only done that, the devil continues to do that, right? But that doesn't mean that the problem is there in the teachings, right? It's in the interpretation. Okay. So within the Tibetan tradition, there tends to be great emphasis on placing groundwork, a lot of groundwork, until one is able to kind of then just leap ahead, but not to leap ahead right from the beginning because of that possibility of danger, of misunderstanding. That's why I feel free to say a quotation like this at the end of this course and not in the first evening. Okay. So why don't we give ourselves a break, and then when we come back we'll have some more questions, and then I'd just like to save a little time at the end for just a few comments I'd like to make. If you look on this sheet for today's teaching, on the other side, under letter N, there's a title. It's entitled "Tomorrow's Highly Recommended Course: Meditation in the Spiritual Path." Now, you may have received notification of this if you're on LMV's emailing list, but if you haven't, I just took this directly from that mailing, and I wanted to bring to your attention because I think of the resources that we have here in this area, that Venerable Rene is right at the very top. I don't know how many people here have met him, but first of all, he's a real sweetheart. He's a really sweet, kind, generous, loving person. So it's just nice to meet people like that. But on top of that, he has spent a huge amount of time in solitary meditation, and you can see the results. But what goes beyond that is that he really has this extraordinary ability on how to convey the meditative experience and to encourage or inspire others in their meditative practice. So he's teaching here Wednesday, tomorrow, 7 p.m., and it's simply called Meditation in the Spiritual Path. And I won't read the description of it because it's available. You've got it. You've got it there. And as I say, probably a lot of you have received it on your email. But if you are free Wednesday night, I very, very highly recommend coming. Also, this wasn't on my mind when I put this here, but generally at the end of our modules we have a practice day, and it's often, if possible, the Saturday following the course. But that's not going to be possible this week because I'm leaving this area for about a week, so I'm just not going to be here. I'll be on the East Coast. So this course isn't going to have its regularly scheduled practice day as it normally does. So even though the topic is not specifically the meditation on emptiness, that is not the specific topic of Rene's teachings, and even though it's not an actual meditation course itself, I have a very strong feeling that you will get as much or more benefit from being with him on a meditative level as you would by having a practice day. So take that on whatever level that you can, but if at all possible, I think you'll find it excellent to attend. Then also next to that is just to mention that this module ends this evening, and the next one, the Introduction to Tantra module, starts on June 7th and continues to July 12th, and I've just written a few things about that under letter O, which follows the description of Venerable Rene's course. Okay, so that's all the advertisements. So now back to the show. Yeah.
I have a question, but I need to just ask a question that will give probably a simple answer, and then I can build from there, depending on the answer. So, is it true to say, so the mind is empty of inherent existence?
Mm-hmm.
Is that one of the things that's empty of inherent existence?
Mm-hmm.
Mind as well. Okay, so then, right, in meditating on emptiness, I have some grasp of an intellectual conception of emptiness,
Mm-hmm.
and I try and use that for my meditation when
Mm-hmm.
someone's leading an emptiness meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself really dwelling during the meditation on emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself completely just going deeper into an intellectual conception, which I find it beneficial for the meditation period. I don't know if I've done it, if I've entered into a meditation actually, because eventually you let go of an intellectual conception and you have some type of realization.
Mm-hmm.
And now it confuses me if that's the case, if you actually do let go of an intellectual conception. That confuses me because if the mind is empty of inherent existence, how is it possible for myself to use my mind, which changes moment to moment? How is it possible that there's one moment that I have a realization of something that's non-intellectual. I don't use my mind. It's empty. In the next moment, I'm on to the next moment. I don't see anywhere, any point in my mind where they can actually have this realization of emptiness, because it's not intellectual and I'm using my mind and the mind is empty. So it's pretty, I find that as an obstacle to entering into the meditation myself.
That's actually a very complex question.
Just a few little things. I really don't know if this is going to help. One is that you said as an aside in the beginning, the mind, you asked, is the mind also empty? Right? And one thing to keep in mind is that any phenomenon whatsoever that we can name, any existent phenomena, is empty. There's no exception to that, okay? Including mind. The other is that emptiness, that a phenomena being empty does not indicate that that phenomena can't function. In other words, sometimes we think that. In fact, this is a very, very profound point. Even among certain Buddhist schools, when they argue or debate with each other, certain schools will step back from positing things as empty. They posit a kind of a lesser form of emptiness or selflessness, not full emptiness. And the reason they do so is because they think if things were truly empty in the sense of lacking inherent existence, of not existing from their own side, then that would be equivalent to saying that they're non-existent, that they can't function. Right? And therefore, they hold back from the full realization or the full immersion into emptiness of inherent existence, because they think that's equivalent to saying things don't exist at all. Okay? So they still hold on to something, because they feel they need the existence of something. For instance, in some schools they need the mind. I can accept that other phenomena don't have inherent existence, but the mind must be inherently existent, or else who's meditating or what's meditating? Right? That's one thing that's held on to by some of the schools. The highest school, and you'll see this mentioned in letter L, the Madhyamaka school, specifically the Prasangika subdivision. That's under letter L, that's 4B, the highest, most profound school. Their tact is exactly the opposite. They say the only reason why anything, whether it be mind or anything else, the only reason why it can function, that it can perform its function, is because it is empty of inherent existence. That if things had the kind of inherent existence that we think they do, they couldn't function. There would be no interrelationship between things. The mind couldn't perceive objects, couldn't gain realizations, and actually where this whole controversy really comes from has to do with cause and effect. That's what it comes down to, very much. Why? Why cause and effect? You remember that one way of discussing the scope of the Buddhist teaching is to refer to the three higher trainings. Right? There's obviously the training in wisdom, higher wisdom. That's what we're approaching here. But that wisdom won't be penetrating enough unless we have good concentration. We can, for instance, hold something in our mind and penetrate it with our wisdom. So the other training that it relies on is the training in higher concentration. But again, there's no way of developing either the higher concentration or the higher wisdom without what? No, not bodhicitta and compassion. Not faith. What's the foundational training? There's three higher trainings. I just mentioned two of them. Do you remember the analogy given of the person who wants to chop down a tree? Remember that one? It's related to It's related to renunciation, but it's not renunciation. Actually, I heard somebody whisper it. Ethics. In other words, moral self-discipline. Right? That's the strength. In other words, we have to avoid doing those actions which give harm to others and to ourselves, and perform those actions which give benefit, because otherwise there's no way of developing, well, there's many reasons not why we have to do that, but in terms of the 3 higher trainings, we have to do it because if we live a dissolute life, constantly creating problems for others and ourselves, there's no way of developing single-pointed concentration. We'll run into so many obstacles and distractions, there's no way to focus the mind. And then, having an insight into emptiness, we can pretty much forget about that, because our mind will be so clogged with the, with the garbage of non-virtuous actions that there'll be no room for that realization to grow. So the foundational training, and this is accepted by all the Buddhist teachings, and in fact, if we step back and take a broader view, it's in fact accepted on some level by all spiritual traditions everywhere. The foundation is self-discipline, ethical discipline, morality, if you don't mind the use of that word. Okay? That without that basis, there is no path. Okay? And what is the essence of the teachings of ethical discipline? It's that our actions have results. Karma. That if we engage in harmful, destructive actions as a cause, the effect or the result is going to be experiences of unhappiness, of suffering. And conversely, if we engage in those actions which are virtuous and beneficial, the result is happiness. Okay? Now, not everyone believes that. Right? There are many people who believe this is a completely random universe. There is no such thing as a connection between cause and effect. Therefore, there's no need to discipline your actions, because you can do a good action and get a bad result. You can do a bad action and get a good result. You can do any action and get any result, because the universe is basically absurd. Okay? And this is not an attitude which is held by just a few people. Right? It's an attitude which is held and propounded by many people, and to some extent, all of us hold this attitude somewhere. Right? Like, for instance, if we have, if we're inspired to do something which is destructive, which we know, the little voice of our conscience says that's really not a very nice thing to do. Very often what we do is we override it. We say, oh, it doesn't really matter. Right? I can get away with it this time. Right? What we're saying then, at that point, what we're saying is there is no such thing as karma. There is no such thing as cause and effect. There's no relationship between what I do now and what I'll experience in the future, therefore I can get away with it. We might not put it into words like that, but that's in fact our belief at that moment. Otherwise, why would we ever do something that's going to cause us suffering, since none of us want to suffer? Okay? So it's vital within the Buddhist teachings, it's vital to be able to establish a connection between causes and results. Okay? So the general kind of superficial understanding is the only way a cause can lead to a result. In other words, the only way a cause can be a functioning event, having as its result an experience of happiness or suffering. The only way that can come about is if the cause is real, if there's a real cause out there. And by real, what we really mean is independent, concrete, self-existent, inherently existent. We think that if causes, such as the mind or anything else, or actions, were not concrete, independent, inherently existent, existing from its own side, any of these synonyms we've been using throughout this course, that if it was not that, then they couldn't function because they wouldn't be real, right? So they must be real, therefore they must be solid, independent, concrete things, existing in and of their own right. That's the only way they could possibly bring about results. Okay? So, this is a good time to quote Nagarjuna. Who's Nagarjuna? He's the founder of this highest branch of teachings, the Madhyamaka. He's the often referred to as the second Buddha. Buddha predicted that a certain number of hundred years after he passed would come someone named Nagarjuna who would give a clear explanation of the wisdom teachings. And then Nagarjuna appeared and did just that. And he did it by propounding this Madhyamaka, or middle way view. And some of you have attended the Guru Puja, which is given here about twice a month. Have you ever attended that? The Lama Choba Guru Puja? Well, at the end of it, there's a prayer that's recited, and one stanza of the prayer goes like this. It says here, Samsara and Nirvana lack even an atom of true existence, while cause and effect and dependent arising are unfailing. We seek your blessings, this is in the form of a prayer to the Guru, we seek your blessings to discern the import of Nagarjuna's thought, which is that these two are complementary and non-contradictory. So what two things are complementary and non-contradictory? One is that nowhere in existence, whether it's in samsaric existence or nirvanic existence, nowhere is there an atom of true existence. Okay? Because by true existence, it means inherent existence, existing from its own side, being out there, separate, independent. Right? That's what true existence means. So true existence is not true. Right? So nowhere is there an atom of true existence. What's the flip side of that? Things exist merely through the process of being mentally labeled. They're merely imputed, merely labeled. Right? Like the word Baba on those lines that I drew the other week. Right? They exist. That word Baba exists, but it only exists through the imputation of a label on a base. Only on that level do things exist. They don't exist truly, independently, inherently, self-existently, from their own side. Okay? They only exist by the power of imputation as a mental designation. Okay? So, samsara and nirvana lack even one atom of so-called true existence. Okay? That's one thing. The other thing is cause and effect and dependent arising are unfailing, meaning that negative causes give rise to suffering, positive causes give rise to happiness, and then he also mentions dependent arising, which is also the interdependent nature of phenomena. So there is a unfailing connection between the creation of causes and the experience of results or effects. Okay? Those are two things. Nothing has true existence, cause and effect works. Okay? And then the prayer goes on that we seek the blessings of the Guru to discern the import of Nagarjuna's thought that these two realizations are complementary and non-contradictory. Because to those who have not gained that understanding, okay, it appears, these two appear completely contradictory. How could a non-truly existent cause give rise to a non-truly existent effect? That's like saying one non-existent thing will produce another non-existent thing. That's how it appears to us, right? Take our sense of self, for example. I mean, that's really the most crucial one, isn't it? If someone comes to you and says, whether it's me or the Dalai Lama or the Buddha or Joe Schmo or anybody, and says to you, you're just a name applied to a mental and physical base, and that's how you exist. You exist solely by mental imputation. someone were to kind of spring that on you, you'd say, get out of here. I'm a lot more real than that, right? I have feelings, you know. I do this, I do that. If I was just on that level, if I was just a mere name applied to a base, then how could I gain understandings? How could I have experiences of happiness? How could I have experiences of suffering? How could I be me? I am me. I am I, right? There's something in us that doesn't want to be reduced to that level. We experience it as if it was a reduction. We experience it as if I were to exist only in that way, that would be equivalent to say, I don't exist at all. Okay? Now those words that I just said then, okay, they only have meaning if we've explored the conceptions we have about ourselves. If we haven't, those are just words, right? And even for myself, who have tried to spend time understanding the meanings that those words are pointing to, even myself, most of the time when I say those words, they're just words, right? They don't strike me as saying, oh my goodness, I'm not nearly as solid as I think I am. And that's what those words should be doing. We should be really insulted when Buddha tells us that we are non-inherently existent, that we have no such thing as a concrete, independent, existing from its own side self. That should be a real slap in the face. It shouldn't be just a bunch of philosophical words. Why? You know, why should we be upset by those words? Because we're continually holding on to ourselves as if we were solid, concrete, independent, self-existent. We're constantly promoting and defending a sense of I, right? Placing it out there. Look at me. Now, we can say, look at me and say how wonderful I am, or we can say, look at me, how terrible I am. Doesn't matter. It's still me. It's still grasping on to a solid, concrete conception of me-ness, I-ness, selfhood, right? And the Buddhist teaching is saying, that thing that you're holding on to, presenting, promoting, defending, maintaining, never existed. Never. Your whole life is built on a lie. You were born because of a lie. You live your life in a lie. You die under the influence of the lie. And under the influence of that very same lie, you're propelled to take rebirth again and again and again. And you're going to continue circling this way, looking for happiness and experiencing suffering again and again and again until you realize that what you're holding on to is a fiction. I mean, can you be slapped in the face any harder than that? Right? I mean, that is really insulting, isn't it? Yeah. It has to be. It has to be taken as insulting and scaring. It has to be. Right? If it isn't taken that way, then these teachings are just words, and our understanding of merely imputed I and self-existent I are just words. Right? But if we gain an idea of how it is that we're tightly holding on to something or other, as if it were the most important thing in the world, and that as a direct result of the tight way we're holding on to it, hatred arises for that which interferes with the welfare of this so-called independent I, attachment arises for those things which seem to be supportive of this supposedly independent I, jealousy arises, arrogance arises, all these negativities arise, all these delusions, all these afflictions arise directly from believing in something that Buddha says is a total fiction. And it doesn't stop there. Because those delusions arise, we're impelled to engage in those actions, or, in other words, create those karmic causes which lead inevitably to suffering. And the root cause is holding on to and believing in the solid, concrete, independent existence of self. And of all other phenomena, but particularly of self. That's the crux of the matter. So Nagarjuna is saying here, or is referred to as having said here in this teaching in the Guru Puja, is saying nowhere Nowhere in all these realms of samsara or all the experiences of nirvana is to be found one atom of such independent, concrete self-existence. It's not found anywhere. And yet, cause and effect work. They function. And Nagarjuna goes beyond that. He says, not only do they work and function, but the reason that they work and function, the reason positive actions lead to happiness and negative actions lead to suffering, is because they're empty of inherent existence. So it's like, it sounds to our ordinary mind, if we really kind of feel what's being talked about here, it sounds as if a reason is being given, which is the exact opposite of what we would expect. We expect if a cause is going to lead to a result, then it's only going to happen because the cause is real and the result is real. Okay? And Nagarjuna is saying, no, it's the other way around. By real, what you mean is independently self-existence. You know, you say real, but that's what you mean. That's how you hold yourself. That's what real is to you. So, if causes were real, they couldn't lead to results. The only reason they can lead to results is because causes exist, like everything else, merely under the power of label, merely as a mental designation. And that's how they function. So, it's a total reversal. You know? One teacher once said, if you want to figure out what it is that you have to refute in emptiness meditation, what it is you have to eliminate, just think of anything that appears to you. Because it's all wrong. Okay? But when we hear that, what comes to our mind? Well, I'll tell you what comes to my mind. It's like, all right, if my vision of this flower is wrong, then it must be something else. It must not be a flower. Right? That's how it appears to me. If my view of this is wrong, then maybe it's, it's an octopus. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's not a flower. That is not what the teachings are saying. They're saying the way it appears to us is wrong. The flower seems to be a flower from its own side, coming to us from out there, shining towards us from its reality, as something independent from the mind that's viewing it. Or, to use other language, from the karmic vision which is creating the appearance. Okay? That way of existence is mistaken, is totally a misconception.
And what about the view of looking at the Dalai Lama and seeing him as an enlightened being? And what are we really seeing?
Well, seeing him as an enlightened being, there's no problem with that. But seeing him as a self-existent, independent enlightened being, that's where the problem is.
Okay.
So it's not as if he's not really the Dalai Lama. He's somebody else. That's not the answer. It's that he's the Dalai Lama. He exists as the Dalai Lama as a name applied to a base, and we can call him enlightened or whatever because his base is purified. So on that level, he exists. He exists as an enlightened being. I'm a little bit reticent to call him an enlightened being because he wouldn't call himself an enlightened being, but let's say advanced spiritual practitioner or great bodhisattva, that's kind of comfortable. All right? So, that's why it says here, all the phenomena within samsara and nirvana, not only the contaminated things are empty of self-existence, but even wonderful things like Buddhas and bodhisattvas and their realizations are also empty of inherent self-existence. Okay? I can see this is raising a million questions, isn't it? Thank goodness we're running out of time. Yes, please.
Okay, so thank you so much for shedding a lot of light on this stuff, but my question is...
But you know I'm about to shed a lot of darkness.
Okay, so mine's a real practical question. So, I don't mean to be flip about this at all, but
No,
there's the whole life of my meditation life, right? My whole, L&B life, and I'm trying to integrate the craziness in which I have been living my last, 40-odd years, here on, anyhow. Okay, so what I've been doing is this, and I want to know if you, because I basically go back to you using tools in order to be able to deal with certain circumstances. So what I've been doing is, like, when I come in conflict with somebody, or if I have an idea of somebody that I shouldn't have, like a prejudgment, or if I get upset with somebody, what I've been doing through this course and the things that we've been learning is that I've been doing it like saying, okay, first of all, I'm not the baba, I'm the fish hooks, and I'm the earlobes, and I'm all that, the stuff that is, that before you named it, that's who I appear to be. But then I get angry and I start to label myself. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I start to put a label on myself and say, okay, I'm this judgmental person who, this person did something, and so so I've been kind of using that as a way to, so is that not okay? I mean, can I look at people and go, okay, you're not a baba, you're not a baba, you're just, a symbol. Do you know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying, but I think you're confusing a few things. Okay, yeah.
That example of the word Baba, right? That is meant to show that quality doesn't come from the side of the base, but comes from being mentally imputed onto the base. And that is actually how Baba exists. Baba exists as a mental designation onto that base. It's not as if the real Baba is the base. No. The real Baba is the mental imputation on the base. So it's not as if people are the fishhooks and not the imputation. They are the imputation. The imputation on the base. You are who you are on the basis of your body and mind. I am whatever I am on the basis of this body and mind. But it's on the basis of that, imputed onto that base. Right? It's not like the real John is his mind or the real John is his body. The real John, the John that actually exists, is a mere imputation on body and mind. And has no existence less than that or more than that. Everything exists as an imputation, as a label, as the thought applied, as the applied thought, okay? Through the power of thought or labeling, okay? Where the teachings become practical is when you're dealing with someone who's difficult in some way, either difficult because he or she is an annoyance, or he or she is an overwhelming attraction. Either of those could be difficulties, right? One impelling you to certain types of negative actions, the other impelling you to other types of negative actions. One more hatred, one more attachment, but both of them destructive, okay? So there's that person who's causing a difficulty, right? Because of the type of instinctive reaction that's coming up with us. What we can do is remind ourselves, the reason that I am reacting in this way is because I'm holding this person to exist exactly as he's appearing to me now, as solid and concrete and independent as if from his or her own side. In other words, if it's a threatening person, he's an inherently threatening person. That being threatening is the inherent quality of that person. That's why I hate him so much. Or being attractive is the inherent quality of that person. That's why I'm attracted to him so much. Okay? So then we remind ourselves that all such appearances then are false, because they don't accord with the underlying reality, which is the absence of those type of inherent qualities. The way Lama Yeshe sums it all up in such a helpful way is whenever we have a strong reaction to something, just let go. Just view the object in triggering that negative action as less concrete, as more transparent, as more fluid. Because what we're doing when we're holding on to it tightly is we're denying it its fluid character, its changing character. So like if there's someone in this room that really pisses me off, it doesn't occur to me the only reason he pisses me off is that, well, maybe this morning he had trouble and then he's come here and then he said a few harsh words and he only said those harsh words because he was under pressure, and therefore it's not really being such an aggravating kind of person. It's not his inherent nature, but it's just like an accidental arisal because of causes and circumstances, and I shouldn't take it that seriously. I should be a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more open in my attitude towards such a person. Instead, I think that annoying quality is inherent to that person. He's a bastard. That's why I'm angry with him. Right? Right. I mean, that's the attitude. That's the attitude. Then we can even take it a further step. I wouldn't be encountering these harsh words or aggressive behavior or whatever it is that's pissing me off. I wouldn't even be encountering that if it weren't for my own karma. In other words, actions that I've engaged in the past are causing the arisal of a karmic appearance of this person being aggressive towards me. If I hadn't created that kind of attitude previously, meaning if the body-mind combination, particularly the mind, in the past, in past instances, hadn't created negative qualities, I wouldn't be reaping as a result this karmic appearance. This person would either be pissed off and out of my life, right? His reason for him being pissed off, and I don't have the reason to see it, so we pass like ships in the night. I wouldn't have the karma to see it. Or, because of my karma, when that person encountered me, he'd be smiling. Right? So there is two different views. One is that really horrible person who I have justification for disliking, or that really attractive person who I have justification for being attached to. Okay? Works on both sides. Works on both sides. If it gives rise to a delusion, it comes from a deluded cause, from an ignorant cause. Doesn't matter whether the delusion is jealousy, hatred, pride, arrogance, attachment. Doesn't matter. Okay? Hatred is the easiest one to identify, but it's true for all of them. Okay? So, there's that person causing this, being the occasion for a delusion to arise in us. We use emptiness meditation initially, and we can do this with great profit by applying it to the object out there, that it is not as concrete as it appears. It's not as concretely bad or good as it's appearing to me now. And we use it to apply to ourselves, that I'm not as concretely the person who is offended or attracted or full of pride, right? That he exists, by virtue of a label being applied to a base. And what is that base? An ever-changing aggregation of bodily and mental parts, including, of course, the karma that's being created. Because what is karma? It's the creation of an ever-changing mental stream, isn't it? So that's why he's so pissed off, right? And why am I experiencing someone so pissed off? Is because of my ever-changing aggregation of body and mind, especially mind, which is helping create that karmic appearance of confronting someone who is such a bastard, is appearing that way, right? So it looks initially, without this kind of analysis, that I'm here, solid and concrete viewer, and I might be holding myself as the great me, or the poor me, or the evolved me, or the unevolved me, or, the wonderful one or the horrible one. I could be casting myself in any of those solid concrete roles. And then out there are all these others who I'm also constantly casting in concrete roles as villains. That's a combination of villain and hero. As villains, heroes, those people that I love, those people I hate, and so forth. Okay? So in all of those cases, what emptiness meditation is allowing us to do is just let go of our belief that there in the mirage is water. That there, in those arisal of momentary changes, there is a solid, concrete, independent core of truth or being from its own side. And I'm just simply reacting to it. Okay?
Yeah.
That's what, when you
Yeah.
did the Bible example, I didn't look at it as the base. I looked at it as you were saying that we're the, how are you saying, the concrete? So what I've been trying to do is, instead of trying to, if I have a conflict in my own mind with somebody, I try to look at them as not labeling them, whether it's by name or by their previous actions or something, but looking at them as like you said, maybe they had a bad day, or maybe they're, and
Yeah.
trying to separate. And so that's why I was using that example, was because before, when you wrote the J's, right, and the hook, I didn't know what it was. It was just symbols. So I try to look at that person like they're that. I don't know who they're, what their experience has brought them to this point of whatever, they're doing. So I don't want to continue to label them by saying, because of their past actions, oh, that's who they're going to be. They're always going to be that.
Right.
Amen.
Right.
You're
You're not going to try to freeze them into
Exactly.
one,
And so
into
that's
what
where
they,
it's-
however they may be appearing.
Exactly.
Yeah, then that comes to the same point.
So that's what
Yeah. No, that is helpful. Yeah. Sometimes what happens is you may be using it correctly without without a language or an overlay which is completely defensible, but still you're using it correctly because you're letting go of the concrete appearance. And as long as you're doing that, that's right. Okay. We're fast approaching the end. I didn't get to exactly what I wanted to say about letter L, except much of what I wanted to say is already there under K and L. Often when you study the wisdom of emptiness, what comes up is a study which is known as tenets, or drupta. This is pointed out here in this handout. And what that comes to is what's often known as the four schools of Indian Buddhist philosophy. And I've listed the names of these schools and and some of the subdivisions of the last most profound school. And the reason for the existence of these schools is that this topic that we've been talking about it's not easy, right? We start getting into the implications of what it means to exist by merely through the process of mental labeling. As I said, if we start getting a sense of what that really means, it pulls the rug out from under us, doesn't it? In ways that are extremely uncomfortable. Okay? Ultimately liberating, but initially uncomfortable. Okay? So, it's difficult for our minds to go directly to those teachings. They're too profound. So instead, what Buddha does is he provides stepping stones. Each step along the way, or each school along the way, helps free us from misconceptions, starting with the gross and then working to the subtler ones. So it's not as if the lower schools are wrong and only the highest school is right. They're all right. Just some are more profound than others. Some go deeper than others. So, for example, we've talked in the past about the kind of misconceptions that we have. One misconception, for example, is viewing things which are in fact always changing as if they were unchanging. Okay? And, you know, we gave many examples from advertising and so forth, you know, where we view the loved one or we view our own skin or whatever it is as an unchanging phenomena, whereas the truth is, all we have to do is begin to investigate a little bit, it's always changing. Right? So there is one level of misconception, applying the concept of permanence onto phenomena which are impermanent, which are always changing. Okay? So the teachings of the lower schools help us understand impermanence and help us remove that level of misconception. Is it wrong? No, it's profoundly right. Is it helpful? It's unbelievably helpful. You know, if we could give up our applying the concept of permanence onto impermanent phenomena, what percentage of our troubles would be overcome? I mean, a huge percentage, right? But would every problem be overcome by that? No, because there's subtler misconceptions that still have to be dealt with. So when you get to the level of the highest subdivision, of the highest school, you're really dealing with the subtlest of all of the misconceptions. That's why the other schools exist. That's why the teachings which were eventually incorporated into these other schools were given by the Buddha to help us to this understanding. So that's why what Jody was saying was so helpful, is that, okay, if we think the only way that I can apply these teachings is come to a complete understanding of the lack of inherent existence of all phenomena, and then apply this lack of inherent existence of all phenomena to myself and everything else I meet, well, we're not going to do anything because it's too hard to understand. It's so contrary to the way we view things. But if we can soften up our view, if when things appear to us as being so solid, so unchanging, so this, so much like their unchanging appearance, if something in our mind says, it's just not that, that's not really the way it exists. It's appearing that way, it looks solid, it looks unchanging, he really seems unattractive and threatening, she seems really attractive and enticing. Therefore my hatred and my attachment are justified. Pardon the use of my pronouns there. Okay? You know, if we find ourselves reacting that way, that's a sign that we're holding on to something too tightly. If we immediately go into the lack of inherent existence, that may be too subtle for us. It's certainly too subtle for me. Okay? It may be too subtle to apply that. But if we can slowly give up the ideas of permanence, of separateness, of things being other things, inherent possessions, will go a long way, first of all, to removing suffering from our life, and second of all, to get us closer to be able to appreciate the lack of inherent existence. So the lower schools are helpful in and of their own right, but they're ultimately helpful because they prepare us for the realizations of the highest schools. Now, there are some people who can go directly to the highest school. You know, they hear teachings on lack of inherent existence, and it touches them. It means something to them, and they gain realizations from those teachings. Our masters say that's usually the case, that they've heard those teachings before. They have imprints, positive imprints from those teachings before. That's why they can gain realizations on that level so quickly. For us, who may not have those kinds of instincts, then we work our way closer and closer to them by giving up the grossest misconceptions first. Which is, and it's these lower schools which teach us how to do that. Okay? So that's kind of what I wanted to say. And that's the function of all of these teachings. And some of the texts that I've mentioned here are massive, hundreds of pages in length. And they're just ways of explaining the kind of different views of where these different levels of philosophical thought take us. But ultimately, the ultimate destination is to remove all misconceptions, most especially the subtlest one, that is that things not only appear to be inherently existent, but we believe them to be inherently existent. And it's that belief in inherent existence, and here we should use synonyms. If that phrase inherent existence has lost its meaning, then, apply a synonym, maybe a fresh synonym, synonym will help, you know. So if things appear to exist from their own side, to be independent, concrete, self-existent, existing from its own nature, from its own characteristics, things appearing that way, that's a mistake. That's the misconception. That things totally lack that manner of existence. But before we reach that, there are many other levels of misconception to be overcome. And these teachings, the scope of these teachings on emptiness, are like peeling away an onion, peeling the outer, grosser levels first, until eventually we get to the bottom. And last thing I'll say is, according to the testimony of great meditators, this also prevents us or protects us from fear. Because if we're suddenly confronted with, you don't exist the way you think you exist, and we go, oh my God, you know, it's terrifying. It should be terrifying if we catch, if we feel the implication of it. Everything I believed in is wrong, right? So when we have that instant confrontation, the result may be fear because we're not prepared for it. But if our understanding is built up, removing grosser misconceptions first, and then ushering us into subtler and subtler understandings, then as we gain this understanding of emptiness, so I've been told, instead of feeling it as a threat or with fear, it feels like we've come home. It's totally comfortable. It's totally liberating. It's open. It's joyous. It's the very opposite of fear. Okay? So, I'm sorry I went over today, but not as badly over as I have done in the past. So, no, but I know people have schedules which are difficult to go past, or they may have children at home to be taken care of. So, we've spent these 6 consecutive Tuesdays, or most of them, together. And during that time, we've tried to wrap our minds around a subject matter which is very evidently difficult, but also evidently very important. Not as a philosophical exercise, but as a way of rooting out the very cause of suffering from our lives and allowing us to experience the fulfillment that we all deeply desire. So, whatever benefit there has been from exposing ourselves to these teachings, may we dedicate it knowing that ourselves as the person who's doing the dedication, the merit that we're dedicating, and the objects that we're dedicating it to lack even an atom of solid, concrete self-existence. With that in mind, may all beings be removed from their mental and physical sufferings. May His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all teachers revealing true paths to higher rebirth, liberation, and enlightenment be endowed with long and fruitful lifetimes. May we ourselves come under the benevolent care of such Mahayana Gurus in this and in all future states of existence. May the enlightened beings inhabiting every corner of the universe continue to turn the peerless wheel of the Dharma, and may we ourselves attain full spiritual enlightenment as quickly as possible in order to repay the infinite kindness we receive from each and every being. Moreover, because of limitations of understanding and experience, it is possible that some of the things said during these past 6 weeks do not accord with the intention of the Buddha and the masters who followed. May any such mistakes leave no imprint upon our mind. It is also possible, through dumb luck, that some of the things said here do accord with the intention of the teachings of the Buddha, and through the inspiration of such kind gurus as Lama Thupten Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Geshe Ngawang Targe, and others. In that case, may those realizations take deep root in our consciousness and sprout in experiences of higher rebirth, liberation, and ultimately full enlightenment for ourselves and for others.